So thanks guys for dialing into this Juro webinar. Today we're going to be talking all about how to hire a high growth legal team. And we're going to be joined today by Natalie Solanki, Sam Ross, and Ben from Charlie HR. And we're going to be talking through the various challenges that legal teams have, both as they start to build a team and then as they scale it. As with all webinars, please do submit questions as you go. You can do that via the Zoom app that you're currently dialed into, or feel free also to tag us on Twitter at @GetJuro. And we're going to devote as much time as we can at the end to answer the questions that you guys have. The webinar will be recorded, so after the webinar you will receive a link to it, and do feel free to forward that link on to others. So we're going to start off by introducing the panel. So first, I'm Richard. I'm one of the co-founders here at Juro. So I'm formerly a lawyer, but now spend my time running a tech business. So I've been familiar with the challenges of hiring and scaling up across both legal and in a business context. With me is Natalie Solanki.
Sorry, I didn't realise I was introducing myself. So my name is Natalie Solanki. I'm the head of legal for FleetCor, which is a company that deals in global business payments. This is probably my fourth iteration of I guess, setting up a legal function from probably either non-existent or small roots. So hopefully I can share with you some of my experience of doing so over the sort of past few years of my career.
Great, thanks very much. And also with Ben Gately, who we've known through working with Charlie HR. In fact, we share investors with Charlie HR and have produced a really fantastic series of content on hiring generally. So welcome, Ben.
Hey guys, yeah, super excited to be here. I am COO and co-founder at Charlie HR, and I've been, I guess, running small businesses for now, I guess, around 10 years. And so in doing that, hiring is something that we've come up against a ton, and it's something that I'm personally super passionate about. So yeah, excited to discuss this.
Awesome, thanks for joining us, Ben. And I think we have on the line Sam Ross, so everyone else is here in Juro HQ, but have you got us there, Sam?
Hello, sorry, I'm being antisocial. I'm a little bit under the weather today, but
might just have some connection issues for Sam. So I'll briefly introduce Sam, and hopefully he can dial back in. So Sam is the general counsel of World Remit. So he was, I think, the first lawyer in that business, and has now scaled it up to a team of, I think it's 7 or 8. So I think between Sam and Natalie, we'll hear the legal perspective of how we can build teams from scratch in legal and also then scale. And I'm especially excited as well to have Ben here to offer what sometimes gets called the non-lawyer perspective. I find that phrase non-lawyer very strange.
I feel very left out.
We don't have non-doctors, but I think a refreshing perspective there from the Charlie HR side of things is going to be really, really helpful. So welcome to all of our panel, and we're going to kick straight off. So the first key question that I think some of the Juro community had was essentially, when do you actually start hiring? So I'm going to ask first, Natalie. I think you were first lawyer in actually a number of businesses. So at what point did you really feel that actually it made sense to go and take out additional people into your team?
Thanks. I think it's a bit of a difficult one, and I think that's probably why it's such a highly asked question. I think being the first lawyer, I think to get a company to that point where they're hiring their first is already quite a big step for a lot of companies, and quite a big investment. So I think, you don't want to kind of ask for help too soon, because obviously you kind of sold yourself into a business by being relatively self-sufficient and able to kind of handle the legal needs of a particular business. But then, I think the way that I've usually done it in the different roles I've had is, especially if you don't have any administrative help, I think, what's kind of coined me towards hiring somebody has usually been through kind of quite a junior role perspective to kind of start to help me set up the operational side of what I need to be able to be successful. So you can definitely do it as a lawyer on your own, but I think you've got to juggle the operational side of your role, the strategic side of your role, and the BAU fighting fire sort of side of your role. So I think, the way that I've done it is usually by hiring interns, relatively junior people on temporary contracts, and then sort of seeing how they fit in with the business, what value they can add, and then using that value add story to sort of say to the business, hey, we could have done it this way, I've got this person, these are the type of time savings or equivalent in monetary term savings, or we're taking some pressure off the business in these areas. What do you want to do about it? We can either get rid of that resource and keep it temporary, or is there a different way of structuring things? And I think when you've got a budget, I think we kind of look at headcount as a different thing sometimes to budget. I guess if we kind of take a step back and look at the way the world's going, technology is also another solution. People are a solution, and more efficiency and expertise are a solution. So how do you blend that? And I think sometimes the answer isn't to hire, but I think when you are on your own in your role, it's nice to have that support around you.
And that point on sometimes it isn't the right time to hire. I don't know, Sam, if we've got your audio now, but I know that's something that you faced at World Remit, was a question of actually when do you hire full stop? If you can hear us now, do you want to offer some thoughts on that?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you fine now.
Wonderful. I am sorry I can't be there at the office, but I've got a cold, so I thought I'd stay away and use the webinar technology to offer my thoughts
I appreciate that. Great.
in a healthy way for everybody.
Stay where you are.
Yeah, so timing of hiring, I think is down to there are obviously themes. Different companies are at different stages in terms of the formality around headcount budgets and the maturity of different teams and the expectations of stakeholders on the intended and optimal size of teams. So I think being flexible and adaptable is really important. I had a really interesting lunch yesterday with another GC who's been in a role for 3 years, a much more senior GC, but has not hired anybody at all because it just worked out that way, and there were various reasons why it just made sense to run his function as a one-man band with outsourced support. So I don't think there is an answer on when to hire and why to hire. I just think if you find yourself in a situation where there is a strong business case to bring in somebody to do something that you're doing, will free you up to do something that's adding more value, and you can see that there is going to be short-term value in somebody coming in and doing that role that you've been doing, then you need to push for it and ask for it.
And Sam, what is kind of pushing for it and asking for it, kind of when it comes down to the kind of the hard questions on budget and what that's going to mean for the legal team? What have you found to be the success drivers in convincing the business that actually it does make sense to bring on that first additional hire?
I think it was kind of, in my case at World Remit, it was an iterative process. So the first conversation I had was prompted by my boss, who said, you could use an assistant, and then I therefore put together a job spec for a lawyer, because by assistant I interpreted that as lawyer. And that person was on a 3-month notice period. So in the meantime, I hired a temporary paralegal who's still with us today as a trainee. So that's 2 people. And then the second conversation was, well, we need someone who, because I'm quite adventurous, I took my kids to Cambodia, and I think my team were a little bit freaked out by that. So the second conversation was, well, you need someone who can pick up things and be your number 2 when you're off looking at Angkor Wat. So that was it. Both times the conversations were prompted by my boss at the time. So it was, I'm quite lucky because I was supported, and there wasn't a lot of convincing that I needed to do. It was more just delivering and having a close relationship with my boss and being able to discuss things in a sort of sensible commercial way with my boss.
And for you, Natalie, I mean, when it came to this question, we hear all the time that legal teams in corporates are a cost center or a support function, which I think is often a sort of an unfair descriptor of some of the value that legal teams can add. But From your experience, was there a kind of challenge in convincing that actually this additional budget would need to be approved for that additional headcount, or was that kind of supported throughout the organisations in which you've worked?
I think so. I've had the opposite experience to Sam, quite interestingly, where I've had to put the business case together. And so I think depending on your reporting line can have an influence on what that conversation looks like. So I think if you report into a GC that may be, in a different countries, and my GC is based in the States, but effectively I'm the European GC for my business, those conversations run a little bit differently because they're lawyers and they get it and they've run teams and they've probably been in the same situation as you. Actually, a lot of lawyers haven't been the first, but hopefully they can have some empathy and understanding as to quality control and what you're asking for. So that conversation looks very different to if you report to a CEO, where they've kind of made the decision to take you on and you are that lawyer. I think you've got to be quite careful that you don't look like you're inadequate in terms of what you can bring to the table, and that that's something that you're not kind of getting right because either you aren't operationally sound, so you've probably got to do a little bit of tidying up and making sure your processes run smoothly. And equally, what are the best uses of your time, and are you able to be there for him and the different people in his in their organisation to be able to do what they want to do. And I think when it comes to the CFO reporting line, or if they're the people who really hold the purse strings, in that conversation, I think really I found that the metrics of what you're spending your time on and a value number you can give to it, and either a cost saving or a time saving, and that visibility has been really useful. So if we rewind to my first role as GC, that was when I was 27, so I was quite inexperienced in some ways, but I reported to the CFO, and I knew that to kind of get to where I wanted to get to in the timescales I wanted to in terms of delivering for the business, if I could make use of cheap resource to kind of help me get that, then I was probably going to make the business case sort of for it. But I recorded my time. Now, a lot of lawyers in-house don't want to record time, but I found just by doing that and having the data to support, well, am I spending my time as an individual in the right place? You've then got something that's an objective view that you can bring to somebody and go, hey, look what I'm doing, be part of that decision-making process with me, and then buy them into that process.
And do you think for you, Natalie, I mean, when you were brought on as GC age 27, so we have our clients in the tech sector will often have a relatively junior lawyer brought in as the first lawyer, and then the challenge is, can you scale in the way that you have into being GC with direct reports? How did kind of hiring strategy come into that? Is it important to kind of get that right from the get such that you can prove out, well, in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, 5 years' time, I'm still going to be running that function, I'm going to be able to scale it?
It's an interesting one. I think it depends on you, your abilities, and what your objectives are. So, with that business, we were looking to float in the next couple of years, and we would have been AIM listed. So for me, my question going into it as a junior lawyer was, can I do this? Can I handle it? And actually, I think what a lot of people don't realise is they probably can. A lot of people in that situation haven't floated a business before in our management team. Yes, they may have been involved in the tech sector more than I had and were older than me, but you're still the lawyer in the room and you're bringing that expertise to the table. So I think when you can kind of think about, well, what am I bringing to the table? Where's my value add? And then own it a little bit more and bring stuff to the table. I don't think you should feel too bad about that. And I think then it just becomes a natural conversation with a peer. How do you successfully run a business? And I guess your P&L and your business, mini business, is your legal function and the delivery of that legal service that you're providing to your client, which is your business.
And I think we've, I know, Sam, you and I have discussed previously this question of, well, when do you need to hire? We were just mentioning earlier, are you going to be the general counsel and just stay sole general counsel? And maybe interesting to ask Ben on this as well. When it comes to hiring people, full stop, if you've never done it before, what are the challenges that face you? I mean, when does it actually make sense to hire anyone, whether in legal or not?
Yeah, look, I think it's risky, right? To some degree, always. When you bring a new person into a team or a business, it creates complexity, and no hiring process is foolproof. We're going to make mishires, we're going to get it wrong, and that's going to cost us time and energy. I think, just slightly backtracking to the point that we were discussing, which is around how do you justify this stuff. And I think, in talking to a lot of our customers who are HR managers and working within talent, often they're having to put business cases together for some of these roles. And I think it's about kind of flipping it in terms of going, rather what is not what is this, I don't have enough time, therefore I need extra resource. Kind of flipping it on its head and saying, look, if we hired, even just an intern, or we hired, a paralegal, it would allow me to go and do X, Y, and Z, and thinking about it in a more expansive way, like here's all this incredible value that I can create for the business, rather than necessarily just, I've got too much on my plate, we need more resource. I think the other argument is so much more exciting and expansive and visionary for a kind of CEO, CFO to get behind.
And I think it should be, it's the language that a CFO would understand as well, right? The ROI analysis. And I remember we had Natalie on a previous webinar where we were talking all about, how legal could prove value to the business. I think framing the narrative in that way sounds really, really smart. So I want to move on to sort of the next kind of brass tacks point, which is essentially, well, how are you going to understand who it is that you're going to hire? So at this point, you've made a decision that actually you need to scale beyond that, in some respects, dream scenario or nightmare scenario of being sole GC. You're building out the team. So I guess maybe a question again just to Ben in the first instance. So working out what you're hiring for. So as you frame it, looking for an ROI there. What's that look like on the ground? What are the kind of processes you would want to go through to have a really kind of clear understanding of what it is you're looking for?
So the first thing that I do when someone in my team comes to me and says, hey, I want to hire someone, is I ask them the first question, which is, what would it take for you to either pick this up yourself or for us to distribute it across the organization in another way? I.e., what do we have to do to not hire someone? Often that, more than anything, just pushes them to think about what this role actually is. And really, that's the key thing that you want to get right at the beginning of this process, which is we often run into this stuff going, I need a marketing manager, or I need a paralegal, or I need an ops manager, or I need someone to work in customer success. And we think about the title. We don't actually think about, what does success look like, and what does a day-to-day for that person look like? And really nailing that down, not only is it going to help them be successful when they're in role, but it's going to help you work out who you're looking for, and that's going to speed up your hiring, and it's going to reduce the risk of a misfire, right? And so, I do three things. I first identify who are all the stakeholders for this hire. There will be stakeholders involved that you don't think are stakeholders, who, when this person is hired, are going to have an opinion on the hire, are going to feed into it.
What would be an example of a sort of stakeholder we wouldn't think about?
So for example, you might hire a designer into a team, right? And that team might be working within a product team, but they might have capability to support other teams. And as soon as they're supporting other teams, the people on those teams are going to have an opinion on if they're being supported in the right way. So understanding who that individual that you're going to hire is going to touch. Are they going to work directly with the CEO? Okay, that person's a stakeholder. CFO, that person's a stakeholder. COO, that person's a stakeholder. Which teams are they going to support? People from those teams are stakeholders. Now, they don't need to be part of the hiring process, for sure, but they really need to be aligned on two things. What does success look like? So in 3 months, 6 months, and at a year, roughly how are we going to determine the success of this hire? And two, what does a day in their life look like?
And the success of the hire, that thinking presumably pays dividends during the onboarding process and the ramp process as well, right? Because you've done the thinking up front.
Yeah, for sure. Like the key reason why, in my experience, and from all the work and content work that we do with our customers, the key thing that goes wrong in a probation period is two things. One, not a clear enough job description as to what that individual is actually there to do. And two, not clear enough objectives as to what we expect from them to deliver from an output perspective. And so often that means the individual that's been hired feels a bit lost and a bit floaty, and they don't know exactly what they're meant to be doing, and people that aren't focused and driven towards something often don't do a good job as we would like them to.
And I think, to kind of put that in a legal context, I just wanted to go back, Sam, to that point you mentioned where you ended up hiring a paralegal. Why did you hire that paralegal, and kind of how did you think about that? How did that come about, and how has that sort of panned out over time?
So again, this is this is not probably what you want to hear, Richard, but it was opportunism. So I had an email in my inbox from one of the paralegal recruitment agencies who'd got hold of my email probably by guessing it. And the email was very well put together, and it just said it's somebody who has got a very good grade in their academics and is available immediately. And I thought, and I looked at the cost and the day rate, and it just seemed reasonable because I had a good idea of what our operating expenditure was as a company. And I thought about the day rate and multiplied it over a few months. I think, Natalie, you were talking about doing these kind of sums yesterday. And I just thought, well, yes, I've got the hire on the lawyer hire, but that's going to take a while to find the right person. So surely bringing somebody in on a very flexible model to help me out in the meantime makes sense. And thumbs up to the legal recruitment profession, because it is annoying when you get emails the whole time, unsolicited emails the whole time, trying to get you to hire a £300,000 a year data protection officer when you don't need one. But then on the flip side, these guys are just doing their job and they're trying to get hungry, talented people in front of you. So sometimes it is good to respond to those emails and see what's going on.
And Natalie, I know you had a slightly different approach when you kind of started out. So who did you hire first? Why did you hire them? How did it work out for you?
Yeah, I really like the way that sort of Sam was sort of saying that he already knew he had the support and endorsement from his sort of senior colleagues, peers, and so he knew that he was going to opportunistically ask for the best quality he could get for the money, because you've already got that buy-in, and then went for the opportunism of going, well, actually, in this interim period, let me get the cheaper hire on and see what we can do. And it sounds manipulative, but I don't think it is. I just think it's clever business sense. I do it a slightly different way around, because in my organisation, already taking that kind of push to hire me, and they haven't had a lawyer with that visualisation across Europe for 7 years, right, which is just a ridiculous amount of time. For me, looking at the next hire, and it wasn't necessarily going to be something that was going to happen straight away. I was happy to go on the journey, sound out what we really needed, as Ben was saying, really do that analysis. And I don't think I could have brought in a more senior lawyer nearer to my level, because, if I'm being honest, things weren't in the best legal shape. That I think somebody at my level, for me being the person with the title and the pay, maybe it's enough to keep it interesting. But can I have somebody as a number two who's really going to be that engaged in trying to deal with stuff which, is probably quite frustrating. It is quite frustrating for a lawyer sometimes to have to deal with if you're sort of tidying up some stuff that could have been done better. So for me, I did have a shared admin, so I was meant to have somebody helping me out. They weren't actually that great, and in the end, we kind of let them go as a collective.
I hope they're not listening.
Well, they probably won't, because they're not in the legal sphere or don't care. But so for me, it was like, well, look, I don't have that support. How do I get somebody who's going to help me on that side of things? But rather than hiring an admin, can I have somebody who's got a bit more, curiosity and legal background and do something with it? So I got that person as an intern. They were really well liked. They could already see this person was bringing way more value for like half the price of whoever was the shared PA resource we had. And so that was quite a good narrative. Then trying to say, well, hang on, I want this person to stay as paralegal. People were really kind of pleased with that. We run our budgets on an annual basis, so I knew that I was never going to be able to get the endorsement to keep that person on a permanent contract. But when it comes to the financial year and budgeting year, that's when I got a bit of time to make a business case, and I didn't know there was no guarantee that person was going to be kept on. So interestingly, that's what I already had. Now, my opportunist moment came when we have a business that we own that has a quite senior guy who was going down to a part-time role, who's managing contracts and business side and the legal side of the contracts. So as he was teetering off, I managed to get the MD of that business open-minded enough to consider replacing that person with a lawyer. And so that conversation happened, and that was then his budget, his business, and we managed to bring on somebody who's, couple of years qualified who, doing a superb job for that business. So it happened a complete different way around.
It's interesting, and I don't want to segue too much into this one, but it is super interesting. So actually being the first lawyer in, so for people who are on the line who are actually in the process of hiring their first lawyer, it sounds like maybe it was too late to go and bring a lawyer in because 7 years goes by and there's too many problems to solve. But if you, Natalie, were kind of hiring for you in the first instance, what would you be looking for as the first lawyer into a fast growth tech business?
I probably would still do the same I've done, because I've done the intern, sort of paralegal, trainee lawyer movement in being that first lawyer in there, because I think you do need somebody to go roll up your sleeves. So maybe it's not an ability or levels thing, it's probably a mentality thing. And so that's why when it comes to hiring, what are you really looking for? In some instances, you may need somebody who's a 5-year qualified lawyer, a 10-year qualified lawyer, because of the complexity and volume of the stuff that's hitting your desk. You just can't really outsource it in a cost-effective way, and it just doesn't make sense to do it any other way. So you're going to try and push for that business case. But I think a lot of the time it's just, if you are the first, there's no infrastructure set up to make you successful. So that infrastructure is only going to grow as quickly as you can embed it. And so how much do you do yourself? How much do you hire consultants? How much do you, how do you do it? And there's a lot of ways of doing it. You'll know what interests you. I'm a legal operationist. It didn't exist when I went into law, right? But I know the reason I've done what I've done so well is because I care about breaking down how do we deliver legal advice and services, mapping that and then questioning, is that the right way? What other ways can we do it? Do we need to change it, or is it okay? And then applying that. And
I think, we at Juro see among our kind of customers just different approaches, and it tends to just depend on what kind of business you are as to what lawyers you're going to hire, or generalists or specialists, etc. And I know, Sam, we've talked about this a little bit before, but as you've now scaled your team up to, I think it's 7 or 8 in the team, how have you thought about those questions, not from the sort of first lawyer in, but actually, lawyers number 6 and 7, you bring in generalists, specialists, and how are you thinking about that?
Well, one of them's attending this webinar, so I've got to be very complimentary of all of the lawyers, whether they're on the webinar or not. But I don't think it's got more specialists. I think the skill set of the people that I need in the team has stayed pretty much constant. But it's nice to have people with slightly different backgrounds and experiences to complement each other. So fundamentally, what I'm looking for is someone who can jump in on any project and help out and engage external specialists if necessary. It's good to have people with varying degrees of experience in terms of seniority, so that you have a nice balance of senior and junior in the team. But in terms of specialism, there hasn't been that focus on, we must get a corporate lawyer and we must get a commercial lawyer and we must get a reg lawyer in. It just hasn't got to that size yet where that specific skill set has been required, because we depend on externals for that support. And it's part of our risk profiling and risk management to get external sign-off when we're dealing with matters that have that sort of higher level of risk.
And I think, we've come to a sort of rather lawyerly conclusion of it depends to this question, but I think it's the right conclusion, because it really is dependent on the nature of your business and what you're looking to solve in the short term. I want to move on to get a little bit more into the kind of nuts and bolts of actually how we make this happen. So at this point, we've decided we need to hire. We've decided who it is that we want to hire. And the question then becomes, well, how are we actually going to hire them in an effective way? So maybe a question to Ben. Looking at a couple of these bullets, some people will have dedicated people teams, HR teams, people ops teams, some won't. But how do you kind of start thinking about this process and get it going if you've not done it before?
Yeah, so I think the key thing to understand at the front of the process, if this is your hire, then you need to take more responsibility for that. And I think some of the things that we see, again across, because we're working with heads of talent, heads of people, HR managers, is a person decides they want to make a hire, and they kind of say, hey, go and find me a paralegal, go and find me an engineer, go and find me a product designer. And ultimately, kind of generalist hiring approach is never going to be as good or as successful as the person, you know, leading it, who's going to be the individual they're working with and who understands the role in greater depth. And so what I tend to say is, you know, the reality is there shouldn't be a lot of difference about if you're working with a people team and without. The biggest difference is going to be probably how nuanced your process is. You know, a people ops team are going to bring a bunch of learning that they have on how to hire well within the organisation. It's going to require probably a bit more legwork for you in terms of reviewing candidates at the very beginning of the funnel and the correspondence with the candidates throughout the process. But really, you know, don't look at it as a massive drag if you've got to run that process yourself. The thing I say to everyone, and I really believe this, the biggest lever that you have within your organization is not your product, it is not your sales, it is not marketing, it is the people that you have within your organization. It is the teams that you put together. They are what make the difference. And so if you want to improve things, if you want to increase your trajectory, if you're frustrated with progress, then take more responsibility when it comes to hiring.
And sort of playing that back, it sounds like if you have a great HR team, that still doesn't really solve your whole problem.
No, for sure. And then, you know, we have an ops manager who devotes a lot of her time to hiring, and I work very closely with her. I'm a founder, COO. I still devote probably 40% of my time to hiring.
Yeah, and I think it's not uncommon, I guess, even as a GC, as you scale your team, to devote considerable time to that process. I suppose thinking about it from a legal perspective, Natalie, I mean, it's all very well advertising roles. We know how we can do it. I think in the old days, we used to put a sort of an advert in the Lawyer and get lots of candidates sending letters in the post. We're in a slightly different world now, and obviously being in a tech business, there's some very specific things you're looking for. So how do you kind of go out and find that kind of that unicorn candidate who's really going to make a difference to your team?
I think it depends what I guess what you've got to deal with to go out there and find your candidates. So in my previous role when I was European GC at Enterprise, you know, we actually had a hire from within policy, which when you think about it, there aren't many lawyers working in the business in other roles. They probably have a law degree. They may have done their LPC if you're lucky, but are they really the right people to have in a team which is effectively a legal and contracts team? You know, I kind of went with it, was quite open-minded. And I think what it kind of led me towards was just thinking a bit more openly and diversely. So you can, you know, work within the constraints of whatever you have to work in. So in the current business, you know, one of the challenges, depending on your view, is, you know, we have to go through people ops team and HR, and they have to do the initial screening. And so it will be down to them how they source the candidate. You know, as Ben was saying, then it's really important that you make sure you're working closely with them, that they understand, you know, and getting the job description right. I think we touched on that earlier. You know, make sure you are able to articulate clearly what it is that you want, because then, you know, if your HR partner isn't somebody who is specialised in recruiting lawyers, they've got a better standing chance of knowing at least what you want and that it's the right type of fit. You know, I think there's a lot more that goes on through LinkedIn searches. I think a lot of companies will do their own organic searches now and will bring candidates to the table, you know, that way. Whereas I think if, you know, when I haven't had an HR function that really feels like they're competent or able enough to assist and lead that process for me, you know, I've kind of taken a bit more of a creative view, which has been, you know, if it's at a junior level, you know, you can do quite a lot with, you know, law schools and universities and, you know, there's all that kind of side of things. And usually you can post now pretty much for free. You've got your LinkedIn sort of page. You can, you know, it's not hard to put an ad on LinkedIn, your job description, that's pretty much all you're uploading, right? But then, you know, I think recruitment consultants are still very relevant these days, especially in a very specified sector. And there are some really good relationships you can build with recruiters out there, which from a selfish perspective, it's always good to have those relationships just in case for you and your decisions about where you're going to be in life. But I think, you know, if a lot of my recruiters, I'd love to be able to use in the right settings, but if the company's policies are a certain way, you've got to kind of trust that and work with, you know, that kind of culture and that way of hiring, but always have that in your back pocket.
And, you know, I think one of the things I build on that in terms of working with recruiters, that for sure in my experience is if you're going to work with them, as has been said, work with them in a really specialised context for a specialised role, not kind of like generally across your entire hiring policy. 2, never negotiate them on their fee. This sounds really counterintuitive. The reason I say this...
See the lawyers shaking their heads.
There's a really good answer for this, right? And it works because we've tested it. If you're a recruiter and you have an amazing candidate and you have 5 clients that are all hiring for the same role, the recruiter is going to give the candidate and is going to push the candidate towards the client that is paying the appropriate fee, right? They are way more incentivized, unfortunately, because that's where the model works, way more incentivized to go for a fee. And so, like, you know, I'm not talking about nailing a couple of percent off here or there, but if you're going in saying we want 15% and their normal fee is 20%, that's a lot of money to them. So I just be cautious of that, right? Like, you want to find the best people, not necessarily get the best deal.
And I think thinking further ahead in that process, right? So, you know, we go into screening and interviewing. Sam, I don't want you to give away the state secrets of how to get a job at World Remit, but what kind of methodologies have you found successful in going and actually testing for some of these attributes at interview?
So I do like the written test. I was inspired by a written test that I did for another fintech company, and it was quite a stressful experience, but at the same time, it kind of got me very engaged with the company and got me thinking about some of the real issues that I'd have to deal with. So this particular company kind of shut me in a room with a laptop and said, you know, come up with some answers on these questions, and you can use the internet and you can use legal resources, but have a think about it and try and get us this answer. Because when you do that, it tells the company so much about how you are as a lawyer and how you operate. Because if you just get in a fluster and you can't really deliver on that and achieve, you know, what they're looking for, then you're not going to be able to do the job. So it's really hard to tell what people are like by just interviewing them, and they can talk a load of talk themselves up. But it's really good, I think, to do a test, because you can see how they respond. It shouldn't be, you know, exhaustive in terms of the skills that you're trying to test in a written test, but it should just, you know, it should test their ability to get the law right, and to think creatively, and to be able to come up with something quickly when an answer is needed, rather than kind of sitting on the fence, which I think is a key skill for in-house lawyers. Secondly, a better alternative is to get somebody on secondment and to test them out first, because there's no that's the best way of doing a hire. It's where you already know the person, and you've worked with them before, so clearly you're super informed about how they're going to operate as a full-time member of the team. So yes, secondment, temp, paralegal, short-term thing first, and then convert to a long-term. And you know, if you're going to do that through a recruiter, then you obviously need to think about your temp to perm fees and the recruitment agreements and so on. But you know, they can always be negotiated.
And I heard one of my favourite examples of a written test we heard the other day from a GC of a tech company was a time-pressured markup test. So essentially what she wanted to test was, on the one hand, do people have the killer attention to detail that is an absolute requirement of being any lawyer, but at the same time, can they prioritise under a lot of time pressure? So those are 5 minutes you had to go and mark up an NDA, where some candidates got very fixated in paragraph 1, the spelling mistakes, and sort of corrected all the spelling mistakes, but it added no value. And some candidates raced through, picked out that there was an indemnity clause, struck it out, and got there faster. So there's probably no right answer in how you approach that. It was interesting to see the different approaches.
Yeah, I just want to say though, on that example with the 5-minute thing, I don't actually support that, because I don't feel like, if you're taking it to a level where you're being unkind to somebody, well, you don't really know them that well, it could come across as a little bit aggressive, and I wouldn't support that if it was getting to a stage where you're putting someone under like an inordinate amount of pressure just to make a point. So I think it's nice when someone shows that they are happy to engage with your company and carve out some time, you know, even if it's at the weekend to do a written test. That's really nice, and that should be really appreciated. But if you're actually kind of putting undue pressure on somebody, it may not be the right way to do it.
Yeah, and I suppose, I mean, one of the questions we sometimes hear, Sam, and maybe interesting to get Ben's view on this as well, is we sometimes hear we don't want to put candidates either under too much pressure or just under too much of a burden in the process. So we don't want to, you know, people preparing written tasks in advance that might put off some applicants if they have a 3-hour assessment centre rather than something else. I think our anecdotal experience at Juro, barring the point Sam makes, which I think is a very good one, is that often candidates want a more involved process for 2 reasons. One is that it's very clear that the bar is higher to what you're setting, and 2 is actually that they might actually learn something in the process as well. I don't know what your experience, Ben, did.
Yeah, I think you know, you're always looking for a multi-stage process, right? And for us, that means always some kind of test, always a phone screen. And then at least 2 office visits, right? And the reason why we want to always do 2 at least as a minimum is there's an amount of time that we need to process what we think about someone, right? And so you know, even a couple of days in between, I'm normally thinking, okay, that was interesting what that candidate said. These are some follow-up questions I want to ask, and making sure you're involving, I guess, different people in that process. The kind of, you know, the key learnings that I've got that I thought would be useful to share, you know, with the community when it comes down to when do we do a test, how do we design the process. Like, I guess it's as follows, right? Which is like, 1, be super flexible. So getting a job is hard, and you want to see the best out of candidates. So if that means you've got to come in early to make it easy for a candidate to make an interview, do it. If it means you've got to stay late and do a test with a candidate from 7 till 8 in the evening, because that's when they can get to you, do it. There's a high propensity that you're going to screen out candidates that just can't make that time if you say it has between the hours of 9 to 5. And there's some good research about how it predicates mothers and fathers and people that have got a dependent they need to go home and look after. So, you know, we would always give as much flexibility to the candidate. Be conscious of burden though. So, you know, setting someone a 3-hour take-home task, I just don't think is fair. If they're interviewing for 10 jobs and that's 3 hours each, that's 30 hours of work. That's a week of work, or a bit less if you're a lawyer.
30 billable hours.
Yeah, there's a lot of cash there. So be conscious of that. You know that you're trying to look for the best in them, and you want to see the best. But do replicate your culture. So, you know, the context of this conversation today is around tech companies. Tech companies are high growth, they're high pressured. If you don't replicate a high pressure scenario within your interview process, do not get upset if the candidate ends up working with you and can't perform under high pressure. So, you know, there doesn't need to be a test, but it could be questions around it. How have you dealt with pressure? How have you dealt with stress? And my final point is, every stage of the interview is a data point and not conclusive. So just because someone fails the task, for me, that doesn't necessarily mean we would say no to them. We would use it as a data point in building up a picture of them to make our final decision, rather than you answered this question badly, that's a no, see you later.
And I'm curious about the kind of the testing for a cultural element as well, right? So generally speaking, we kind of know what the hard skills are we're looking for. We've got a strategy around testing it, but there's also that other thing, which is this person going to be the right person to work within my team and also within the company? I don't know, Natalie, how you've thought about that in the process and how you get a feel for that from candidates.
Well, it's interesting hearing, I guess, Sam and Ben's approach to interviewing and trying to kind of tease out information and data points in relation to candidates. When I first did the GC role at 27, I did use the written exercise as something I thought would help me. And I think perhaps, if I'm being honest, it's probably because I was quite inexperienced. I hadn't really hired that much before, and I was going to have to take ownership of it. So I thought it would give me a more objective way of looking at candidates. And I guess as I got a bit older, I probably got less formal in interviews. And actually, my interview style and technique is very informal. I think it reflects how it is going to be working with me. But what I try to be very good at is being very open and honest about what the company's like and the culture, and what my expectations are and the company's expectations are of the candidate. So, before the interview, if you want to test attention to detail, you can see it for yourself. But I found what's quite effective, and it worked with my latest hire. I don't know if she's listening, but one of the things I talked about was, I really care about attention to detail, and I don't want to see sloppy mistakes in work. So if you're somebody who thinks that the bigger picture is enough and the substance, if I'm going to see work that has those mistakes in, I'm not going to be too pleased with it. So that person knew if they didn't have that attention to detail, or it's something they want to work on, yes, we can work on it together, but if it was really something that isn't that important to them, it's probably not going to be the right fit for them. So I kind of turned it more on the kind of, the sort of characteristics of the role and expectations. And equally, getting an idea for how good is that person. Sometimes actually trying to ask if you can approach past bosses and get those references early on in the process. So you can say, look, these are the sort of things I find important. Does this person have those qualities? And, they're not going to try and sell somebody into a role that's probably not going to be for them. And I think, that's another way of kind of getting that realistic view of somebody, as well. And I think, as Ben said, asking about experiences. So give me an example of when you've been under pressure. You can, if you're clever with the way you ask the questions, tease out, well, is it really a genuine example? Were they really under pressure? And actually, if you don't have an example, give me another. And if you don't, maybe you've never worked under extreme pressure. And so I think there's an old-fashioned way of doing it. But I think, there's so many ways you can approach it. Going back to you as an individual, what suits you in your style, and what is the genuine representation of how it's going to be working with you.
And I think it's been great to hear, I think, throughout the webinar so far about this idea of getting the job description right, setting the expectations right, ensuring there's clear alignment between what's expected of the candidate and what they're going to be delivering, getting that cultural fit right. And I suppose to come on to this kind of final section here, if we assume at this point we've hired that candidate, all of this is trying to de-risk that candidate's experience of the company and the value that they're going to add is going to be exactly what you expected. So maybe a question to Ben, but I mean, what would you say when it comes down to onboarding candidates are the things that can really help you drive success there?
So I think the first thing is it starts before they walk through the door. So, you hire someone and they accept the offer, you send them the contract, maybe they wrote their own contract as a lawyer, I don't know, is that how it works? and they sign it, and maybe they've got like a month or 2 months notice. So that's when the onboarding starts. So for us, that is, what are the kind of books that we would like them to read that talk to our culture, our values, and how we work? What are the ways of working and styles of working that are unique to us? We work in a really unique way, well, not a super unique way, but we use OKRs, we use Scrum, we work in cross-functional teams. If you don't understand those contexts and those ways of working before you walk through the door, day one is going to be super scary. We have a full company huddle first thing every day at 10 o'clock. Those are quite intense experiences if we're new to that. So preparing them for all of that. We have a company glossary, which is like, what are all the words and sayings and abbreviations that we use? Because it's really...
Lawyers would call that defined terms, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Bullshit in my book. Try and ban abbreviations as much as I physically can. Like making sure they feel comfortable with that. Getting a really good onboarding process, and that should be 1 to 3 months. That first month, there should be a weekly check-in. And then after that, a kind of like 2 weekly, 3 weekly check-in, and then a good probation review at 3 months. And making sure that probation review is a good 2 weeks before the probation end date, so if you need to extend, you can. And making their first day really nice. So for me, there's always a bit of angst around people's first days. So we meet them at a coffee shop around the corner. Never let someone walk into a company on their first day on their own. Super intense. It's like a bit scary. It's like first day of school. No one wants that. So we take them for breakfast, take them for a coffee. Their hiring lead will do that, and they'll walk in together. That's nice. Second thing is tell them what to wear. It sounds silly, but the amount of questions that we get from people who are starting, like, what's the dress code? I can't remember that everyone's quite casual in the interview, but is that the case? Just say, this is what our kind of dress code is. Everyone's wearing like t-shirts and jeans, or is it more formal, it's smart casual, whatever. And then we give them a buddy. So they have a buddy throughout their entire 3-month probation, and on their first day, their buddy will take them for lunch. Again, that's another point. where there's a bit of anxiety, right? Who am I going to have lunch with on my first day? Who am I going to sit with? So let's just take that off the table straight off so they can focus on doing the best job they can.
Perfect. And I'm conscious we've got lots of questions coming in. Do keep posting the questions. We're going to try and get through as many as we can. I think on this slide, just to kind of round things off, I'm interested to ask maybe Sam first and then Natalie. When it comes down to performance management, what have you found to be effective? And I think, often across the functions of the business, sometimes performance reviews are a little bit more straightforward. If you're doing a performance role for someone in sales, you've got some data, you've got some metrics, they're either hitting their targets or they're not, and then there's other things. But in legal functions, we sometimes hear it can be a bit more intangible. So it'd be interesting to hear, Sam, what's your approach to that performance management, and what have you found to be the drivers of success?
So I just think constant, polite, respectful feedback is because in the absence of a formal performance management program, that's what I've been doing. So I came from Barclays, where I was subjected to probably the most formal type of performance management program for an in-house function, given there were around 1,000 lawyers there at the time. So I kind of understood the method of doing that, and there are obviously huge advantages to that, and it's completely necessary when you've got hundreds of people that you're trying to treat fairly and assess. But when you've got a very small team, I guess I was quite lucky because I was able, when I was growing up, my mum ran a GP surgery, so she would always come home and sort of tell us, what was going on in the surgery and how she was dealing with her staff members, and not specific examples, but just, this is how I'm motivating people, this is how I'm dealing with conflict, this is how I'm dealing with this and that. So that was quite helpful. And I think just in the team that I've built up, I've just tried to encourage honesty. And, if a team member expects something from a team member they're not getting, or if I expect something, or if someone expects something of me, you should just say it. So an example in my team is that, one of my team members went for a coffee with me and gave me feedback on some aspects of what I was doing as a manager. And she felt empowered to do that. And I made a change that day that really helped me in how I was performing in my role. So I think if you can create an environment where nobody's scared to give somebody direct feedback on what they're doing, whether it's their work or their style, that's a really good way of keeping the performance levels up in the absence of a formal performance management system.
Because I think we're going to jump into questions now. So we've got just 7 minutes, and we've got quite a few. So we're going to kick off there. So from the first question, as a GC/sole lawyer, how do you manage non-lawyers? Again, my favourite phrase: non-lawyers or senior management of the business influencing hiring within the legal function. So I think this is a question around stakeholder management. But Natalie, what's been your approach to tackling that?
I think a lot of these people know that actually generally are interested in who you're hiring, right? So I think don't rule that out. When I was at Enterprise, we had a sort of layered sort of interview process where I didn't actually conduct the first interviews. I let my team members own that, and it didn't matter what level you were at because you were going to have to work in that team. I also thought there was an ability to be a bit more honest earlier on in the process without me influencing it, being the more sort of senior manager. So hopefully they can ask questions. What's it like working for Natalie, etc. But I would usually involve people like the heads of sales, the CFO, the finance director for our division, the HR people, because they actually were interested in seeing what these people were like. So I think my way of getting them involved was just showing that you actually care about their view, and if they have the time, then they'll make the time.
And Sam, I know we've had a discussion before about how you've managed to get buy-in for the legal function, the relationships upwards to the C-suite. Like, what's that look like in practice?
Sorry, what aspect of the
So the question is, as a GC/sole lawyer, how would you manage non-lawyers or senior management of the business influencing hiring within the legal function?
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah. Well, I think just take their views seriously. So if someone's got a perspective that they really need a regulatory lawyer, for example, just take the time to understand why they have that thought, and dive into it a little bit and try and understand their perspective, and then challenge it if you think it's overkill or underkill. So if there's a divergence of opinion on what skills are needed, just try and have a sensible discussion about why there's a delta, and try and compromise. If you sort of partially agree that a certain skill set's needed, but you don't really want it in your team, or you just don't agree that it's needed, try and empathize and work towards a solution. I don't think it really makes sense to try and defeat somebody's perspective on something, because unless they're completely and utterly wrong, in which case I guess you have to take the risk of saying that and challenging. But I would always try and understand their point of view as much as possible.
Cool, thanks. And I think we have time just for one more question. So the question is, do you recommend using flexible resources like Lexu, Flex, and LOD, Lawyers on Demand, I think that is, to resource in the short term, and what are the limits of doing so? So I guess, maybe a question, Ben, just outside of the legal context, that flexible resourcing kind of freelancer aspect, is that something that you've found success in?
Yeah, and so we've used this in a bunch of ways across our organisation, finance, legal, and look, I think there's going to be positives and there's going to be negatives. Flexible resource you can turn on much faster, but they just aren't going to have the context that someone internal is going to have. They're not going to be able to maybe do things exactly how you would like them to do it. There's going to be communication struggles. So often we think that a kind of on-demand resource saves you time, but maybe actually over the period, actually that time is better invested into hiring someone. So I wouldn't actually say one is better than the other. I would say just understanding what the weaknesses are and then choosing the solution that's right for you at the time.
And then Natalie, have you taken advantage of the on-demand resources, or have you basically brought everything kind of full-time in-house?
I nearly have, and I've inherited on-demand lawyers when I've been coming into teams. And I think a lot of people just think because it's a modern way of getting legal advice that it's better, and I think people can get it so wrong. And I think that's where you've got to really go down to that sort of analysis of what do you really need, what's the JD. And I think Lexu is great, but it's a platform that allows you to tap into different lawyers of different disciplines, right? FLEX is, for quite junior lawyers and, who are paralegals. And so it's an amazing resource if you want a quick paralegal, but, query whether actually getting them in your own way is a better way to do it. And then Lawyers on Demand, it's a more traditional way of doing things, but, is that the right fit? Who knows?
And I think just in the final couple of minutes, I'm just going to ask each of the panel for one top tip that they would have as a takeaway from this process. Maybe we could start with Ben. What would you say is the one thing that you would be focusing on as you go and build out a legal team?
So look, the advice I can give is when it comes to hiring, stop talking and start listening. The amount you will learn from listening to someone rather than talking at them is just exponentially higher.
Know what it is that you want and make sure it's the right fit for your business. I think, I've done this role a few times now. I've never replicated exactly the same way of doing things in a different business. So again, what is it that you need to do that due diligence?
And Sam, what one tip would you have from your perspective?
Be proactive. So try to get out of the mentality that someone's going to tell you what to do the whole time, which is kind of the experience of working in a law firm. You have to break out of that as soon as possible and start experimenting and trying to make things happen yourself, because nobody else cares as much about the legal function as the people in the legal function.
Great. So to Ben's point, it's time for us to stop talking. So thank you to everyone who's dialed in to this webinar. As we said, the webinar has been recorded. We're going to circulate the slides and also a link to this webinar. In the meantime, we'll continue the discussion on Twitter, so we're at GetJiro, and otherwise you can see all of our hiring resources specifically designed for tech GCs at blog.jiro.com.